Welcome to our deep dive. And today we're going to be exploring the world of Antonio Vivaldi. Most people know him for the Four Seasons, but I think there's a lot more to him than that, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. Vivaldi's life is it's full of these fascinating contradictions and these turns you don't really expect. I mean, he was a priest, but he revolutionized opera. He was a musical virtuoso, but he died in poverty. And he was so prolific, but for centuries, almost everyone forgot about his work.
That's really interesting. So what exactly are we going to be looking at today to try and understand Vivaldi a bit better? I have to say I'm really interested in the human side of him, the
Yeah.
person behind the music.
We're going to be going through some biographies for sure, some analyses of his music. We even have some of his letters. It's like unearthing this incredible time capsule filled with all these personal details. And from that, we can try to understand his personality, how he approached composing even the world he was living in.
I like that. A time capsule. So let's start with maybe the most obvious thing. His nickname, Il Prete Rosso, the Red Priest.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know about you, but I don't usually picture a priest composing operas, and definitely not operas that were kind of pushing the boundaries like they were back then.
Yeah, it is one of the things that makes Vivaldi so fascinating. He was a man of the cloth, but his music was, well, it was definitely not subdued. There was so much passion, drama, energy in it. And yeah, some of his operas, they really did challenge the norms, caused a bit of a stir.
I even read that he got in trouble with the censors, right? For his opera Arcilda, Regina di Ponto. Something about the main character falling in love with another woman who was disguised as a man, which, for the 18th century, that's pretty daring.
It really was. It shows that he wasn't afraid to put those complex themes, those raw emotions right into his music. But there's actually another layer to this whole Red Priest thing. You see, Vivaldi had this chronic illness, probably asthma. And because of it, he couldn't actually perform mass. But he did remain a priest his whole life.
So that adds a whole other dimension to him, doesn't it? Do you think his health, I mean, knowing that, do you think it had any effect on his music?
It's hard to say for sure, but it is something to think about. Some scholars think that his physical limitations might have been, in a way, what pushed him to go so far with the violin. Maybe because he couldn't express himself fully through the traditional religious means, he poured all that energy, all that passion into his music instead.
And, when you connect that to his music, you almost hear it, don't you? That feeling of, I don't know, maybe a yearning, a longing, especially in some of those soaring melodies.
That's a great point. It really does highlight how important it is to understand the human side of these composers. Their struggles, their joys, their passions, it all goes into their art.
Let's move on to something else interesting about Vivaldi. His relationship with Anna Girò. Now, was there any truth to those rumors, or was it all just speculation?
It's actually a bit of a historical mystery, one that people still talk about today. Anna Girò was an incredible contralto singer, and she became a fixture in Vivaldi's operas, often the lead roles. They traveled together, collaborated really closely, and everyone said they had this very close relationship. But romantic, that's not so clear.
So no proof of anything romantic going on.
Not really. There's a letter written by Vivaldi where he actually denies it. He says their relationship was purely professional, based on mutual respect for each other's talents.
Oh, that's a shame. I was hoping for some juicy details. What else did he say in this letter?
Unfortunately, not much about their personal lives. It seems he was mostly trying to address these accusations people were making, protect her reputation and his own. He chose his words very carefully.
Too bad. I would love to know what he really thought of her, what he felt.
I know, it is tempting to try and piece together those personal lives, especially when their professional lives were so intertwined like that.
So do you think there was more to it? More than we know, I mean?
It's possible, but without more evidence, it's just speculation. What we can say for sure is they definitely had a deep connection, professionally, and a strong respect for each other.
Yeah, that's fair. Let's move on to something else I found interesting about Vivaldi. His wit, and sometimes his frustration with the critics. I even came across a quote. He said, "If you don't like this, I'll stop writing music." What was going on there? What was he talking about?
Oh, that. He wrote that on a score, actually, for his opera Orlando Furioso. It was next to this aria, a really complex and difficult one. It's hard to say if he was being serious or maybe just, making a joke. A little bit of sardonic humor.
So maybe he was teasing the critics a little, daring them to dislike his work.
Possibly. Vivaldi was known for his wit and his, well, let's call it his tendency to push boundaries, so maybe he wanted to provoke them a bit. Or maybe he was just reminding everyone, look, I'm the composer, this is how I want it to sound.
It certainly shows he had a personality, doesn't it? He wasn't just a musical genius. He was a person with opinions and emotions and all that. And sometimes that came through in his work.
Absolutely. And it's those little glimpses, those hints of personality that make him so much more interesting to study. He wasn't just a name on a page, he was a real person with flaws, with contradictions, just like everyone else. We've been talking about the life of Antonio Vivaldi, and I think it's safe to say he was a fascinating guy, but there's always more to uncover, isn't there?
There really is. It's like we're piecing together this puzzle, all these fragments of his life and trying to see how they connect to his amazing music. So where do we go from here? I'm ready to dive into the music itself, especially his most famous piece, The Four Seasons. I mean, what is it about that music that makes it so captivating, even today, centuries later?
Well, one thing to remember is that the Four Seasons is programmatic music, and Vivaldi was a master of this style. You see, unlike more abstract music, programmatic music is about more than just sounds, melodies. It's about creating a picture, telling a story, even evoking specific emotions.
So you're saying it's almost like a musical storybook.
Exactly. Each concerto in the Four Seasons is about a specific season.
Mm.
And in each movement, Vivaldi uses all these techniques to depict the sounds, the sensations of that season. He uses the violin to imitate birdsong. He uses these driving rhythms to evoke a summer storm, even pizzicato to mimic raindrops.
Wow, that's incredible. It's like he's using music to create a whole world, to transport you somewhere else.
That's exactly it. He's creating an experience that goes beyond just listening. He's engaging your imagination, making you part of the story.
No wonder it's so popular even now. It's a masterpiece, a work of art that appeals to your mind and your emotions at the same time. But I want to dig a little deeper into the technical side of things now. I've heard about concerto form and ritornello form. Can you break those down for me? And how did he master these forms?
Of course. So first, the three-movement concerto form. This was something Vivaldi perfected, and it became really important in the Baroque period and even after. Typically, it's a fast, slow, fast tempo structure. The first movement is all about showcasing virtuosity, energy. Then the second movement provides a contrast, something more lyrical, contemplative. And finally, the third movement brings back that fast tempo and energy.
And the ritornello form, I'm not really familiar with that one.
That's another key element of the Baroque concerto. Basically, you have a main theme called the ritornello, and it's repeated several times throughout the movement. But between those repetitions, you have these contrasting episodes where solo instruments take the lead. Imagine it like a conversation where you have this recurring topic, but each time it comes up, there are these new interjections, these responses.
So the ritornello is like the main topic, and the solo episodes are like the different perspectives.
You got it. It's a clever way to create a sense of unity, but also allow for these moments of individual expression, those virtuosic flourishes. And Vivaldi was a master of this form. He wove these intricate melodies, harmonies into the ritornello, and then in the solo episodes, well, he gave the soloists a chance to really shine.
Is there a good example of this from the Four Seasons where we can actually hear it?
Sure. The first movement of Spring from the Four Seasons is a perfect example. The ritornello theme, it's bright, cheerful, like the arrival of spring, and it keeps coming back, but each time the orchestration changes a bit, or there are some new embellishments added.
And then in between, we have the solo violin, right? Doing its own thing.
Exactly. It's like this back and forth, this dialogue between the orchestra and the soloist, each building upon the main theme. And that interplay, that tension, keeps you hooked the whole way through.
You know, it's amazing. Vivaldi wrote so much music. We're talking over 500 concertos, operas, sacred music, sonatas. It's just mind-blowing to think about how much he actually composed.
And the remarkable thing is that even with all that music, he never sacrificed quality. He was always experimenting, pushing the boundaries of different instruments, different forms.
You know, I was reading that Vivaldi actually wrote concertos for all sorts of instruments, not just the violin, but bassoon, cello, oboe, flute, even the mandolin. Did he change his approach depending on the instrument?
He did, and that's one of the things that makes him such a versatile composer. He understood the unique possibilities of each instrument, and he wrote music that really brought those strengths out.
Can you give us an example? How did he tailor his music to, say, the bassoon?
Well, take his bassoon concertos. The bassoon was often kind of a background instrument in Baroque music, but Vivaldi, he saw something more in it. He wrote these concertos that highlighted its rich, warm tone, but also its agility, both in fast and slow passages.
So he gave it a chance to shine, to be the star, so to speak.
Exactly. He did the same for other instruments too, like the cello, the oboe. He wasn't afraid to go against the grain and write music that really showcased the talents of these often overlooked performers.
I love that. It shows his innovative spirit and how he was always looking for new ways to make music. Did he ever write anything for voice and instruments together?
He did. Vivaldi also composed a lot of sacred music, motets, masses, oratorios, and these pieces often combined vocal soloists, chorus, and orchestra. It showed his incredible skill in writing for both voices and instruments, creating these rich, multi-layered textures.
I'm really curious now to hear some of his lesser-known concertos, maybe one for the bassoon or the oboe. It would be amazing to experience Vivaldi's music from that different angle.
I think you'd really enjoy that. Exploring his less famous works is a great way to get a better sense of his versatility and his originality.
But what about Vivaldi's impact on other composers? Did his music have any lasting influence on the music world?
Oh, absolutely. One of the clearest examples is Johann Sebastian Bach. He was a big fan of Vivaldi's work, and he even transcribed some of his concertos for different instruments. You can hear those influences, that melodic and rhythmic energy that Vivaldi was known for in some of Bach's compositions.
So even though Vivaldi's music kind of faded away for a while after he died, it was still alive, in a way, through the work of other composers. Like, his musical DNA was woven into the history of music.
That's a great way to put it. His influence, even though it was hidden for a while, it never really disappeared. And then in the 20th century, his music experienced this incredible revival.
It's really sad, isn't it? That a composer as talented, as prolific as Vivaldi could be forgotten like that. What happened? Why did he fall out of favor after he died?
It's hard to say for sure, but a few things probably contributed. Musical tastes were changing, and the Baroque style, well, it was giving way to the classical era. And Vivaldi's music, it was very much tied to a specific time and place, Venice in the early 18th century. As new musical centers emerged, new styles, his work might have seemed a bit old-fashioned.
I get it. It happens in so many areas, doesn't it? Art, fashion, literature. What's cutting edge one day becomes outdated the next.
Right. But sometimes, like a fashion trend that comes back around, Vivaldi's music found its way back into the spotlight. And the rediscovery of those lost manuscripts in the 20th century, that was huge. It was like a missing piece of the puzzle was finally found.
It must have been incredible, like finding this treasure chest full of amazing music that no one had heard for centuries.
It was a real turning point. Musicians, audiences, they were all captivated by the freshness, the energy of his music. It was like hearing it for the first time.
It's so interesting how that happens, isn't it? Those cycles of rediscovery. Suddenly, a forgotten artist or composer becomes the next big thing, centuries after they're gone.
It reminds us that truly great art, it has a way of enduring. Even if it gets lost for a while, it eventually finds its way back.
Speaking of rediscovering Vivaldi, have you heard the story about Fritz Kreisler, the violinist? He actually performed and published a concerto that he claimed was by Vivaldi.
Ah, yes. The Chrysler hoax. It definitely stirred things up in the music world. Everyone was shocked when it came out that Chrysler had actually written the concerto himself.
Why did he do that? Was he trying to trick people?
Well, later on, Chrysler admitted that he had written the concerto, but he'd said it was by Vivaldi because he thought audiences would be more open to a work by a famous Baroque composer.
So Vivaldi's music was so good that even a world-famous violinist used his name to get his own music heard.
You could say that. Chrysler really admired Vivaldi's style, and he figured his concerto would have a better chance if people thought it was a lost Vivaldi piece. Funny enough, that Vivaldi concerto actually helped bring the real Vivaldi back into the spotlight. It introduced a lot of people to his style, his energy, and it made them want to hear more.
So even when he wasn't around, Vivaldi was still shaping the music world.
Exactly. Which brings us to a really interesting question. Why? Why is Vivaldi's music still so popular today, centuries later? What is it that connects with us on such a deep level?
That's a great question. What do you think?
It's hard to pin down exactly, isn't it? But I think part of it is that Vivaldi's music just has this timeless quality. It speaks to us no matter our background, our culture. There's a vibrancy and energy to it that's impossible to resist.
I agree. For me, it's the joy in his music. Even when it's dramatic, there's this sense of vitality, of life. It's hard to explain.
You're right, he doesn't shy away from those big emotions, does he? But underneath it all, there's always this current of optimism, this feeling of embracing the world, the beauty in it. It's almost like he's saying, hey, look around, life is amazing.
And it's not just the emotions, it's the melodies themselves. They're so catchy, so memorable. I catch myself humming them days later. It's like he knew exactly how to write a tune that would stay with you.
He definitely had a gift for that, didn't he? But it's more than just the melodies. It's how he combines them with the rhythms, the harmonies. It's all so well balanced, so structured. It's stimulating, but also deeply satisfying.
We were talking earlier about how Vivaldi was both praised and criticized during his time. What kind of criticisms did people have?
Well, while a lot of people admired his skill, his innovation, some thought his music was a bit too flashy, maybe even superficial. They said he focused too much on catchy melodies and technical showmanship, and not enough on real emotional depth.
So, a bit of a controversial figure, like so many artists who try to push the envelope, who challenge the status quo.
He was. But in the end, it's the music that matters, right? And the fact that we're still listening to it, performing it, centuries later, I think that says it all.
You spent so much time with Vivaldi's music, I'm curious. Did you come across anything during your research that surprised you? Something that changed your view of him?
You know, one of the best things about studying Vivaldi has been this constant sense of discovery. I started with the famous concertos, of course, but then I went deeper, started listening to his lesser-known works, the oboe concertos, the cello sonatas, his sacred choral music, and I was just blown away by how much variety there was, how deep his music went.
And like you said before, it's a time capsule,
Yeah,
and you never know what you're going to find next.
exactly. Each new piece I discovered was like a different side of him, another layer of complexity, of beauty. It really showed me that with Vivaldi, there's always something more to learn, a new perspective to find.
You've made me want to go on a Vivaldi listening binge. Beyond the Four Seasons, where would you recommend I start?
I'd say dive into those concertos for the less common instruments. The bassoon concertos are a great place to start. They're full of warmth and personality. And the oboe concertos are amazing too, a really nice blend of virtuosity and lyricism. Oh, and don't forget the vocal works, especially the sacred music. It's incredibly powerful, emotionally resonant.
So much to explore. For someone who's just starting to appreciate Vivaldi, what's the most important thing to remember?
I think the key is to listen with an open mind, with curiosity. Don't be afraid to go beyond the familiar, to explore all the different sides of his music. Listen for those little details, those nuances that make his style so unique, and let the music sweep you away. Let yourself be moved by it.
And don't forget to listen with your heart, not just your head. Vivaldi's music, it's meant to be felt, experienced. It's a celebration of life, of the power of music to move us, inspire us, connect us to something bigger than ourselves.
Well said. That's what it's all about in the end, the emotional impact. Vivaldi's music, for all its intricacies, its complexities, it offers a truly profound listening experience, one that continues to resonate with people centuries later.
I think we've given our listeners a pretty good introduction to the Red Priest today, wouldn't you say?
We've only just scratched the surface, really, but hopefully it's enough to pique their curiosity, to inspire them to explore Vivaldi's world a bit further. There's so much to discover.
And on that note, we'll bring our deep dive into the life and music of Antonio Vivaldi to a close. But before we go, we'd like to leave you with something to think about. Given his prolific output, his dramatic life, and the enduring popularity of his music, do you think Vivaldi was ultimately happy? And how do you think his music reflects his inner world? Until next time, happy listening.